Brought the auxiliary belly tank here into the shop. I did all the work on it so far outside. I ground down all of the gel coat off from where we're going to do the fiberglass work and stuff. Got the holes opened up for 2-inch tubes to go through for the flying wires, and got it cleaned up around where that quick drain goes and around where the new filler neck is going to go. I was really surprised. I had a little bit of a crack there in the bottom that I could see once I got to inspecting it. Right here, I was really surprised at how thin the fiberglass was there. Once it got the gel coat off, you can see the holes that opened up in the thing there, in that sump there where the fuel collects, the crap in the fuel and stuff collects in that sump. You can see how thin that is where it makes that bend right there. That stuff, I just barely touched it trying to get the gel coat off there, and it just disintegrated. So I washed it down with water and then with paint thinner in and out, and then I washed everything down with acetone. So now I'll get my fiberglass stuff ready to go and see if I can't figure out how to fiberglass. Well, I'm ready to start mixing some fiberglass and stuff and start putting things together on this fuel tank. Now, the first thing that I want to do is to put this bushing in that I made up for the quick drain. I cut a piece off and cut a circle around it to fit into this bushing, and I'll go ahead and fiberglass that on first, and then there'll be some more pieces go over the top of that to reinforce it, but most of the reinforcing will be on the inside. We'll go on these grooves that I made on the inside here. I'm using West System resin. It's kind of expensive, but the regular fiberglass resin, the epoxy resin, makes me sicker than hell, so I can't really use it. So this stuff doesn't seem to bother me any, and it comes in these containers, and you've got the pumps here that meter out the amount of resin and hardener, so that, you know, 1 pump of resin and 1 pump of hardener is the right ratio. So there's 1 pump of resin. 2 pumps of resin. 3 pumps of resin. Now let's see if the hardener thing works. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now I'll get something to mix that up with, and we'll start putting stuff together. I started out taking a piece of this 4-inch tape, cutting it off, and then slicing it in and putting a hole in it the size of the smaller dimension, the minimum dimension on there, on that bung that I made, that bushing that I made, and then put it onto the belly tank itself. And I could see that wasn't going to work. I just couldn't get it lined up in there in the hole right, and I couldn't get it to hang up in there. It just takes too long for that fiberglass to set up. So what I did is I took that all apart, and then I took another piece, a smaller piece of the 4-inch tape, and I took this lid that is for a paint, one of these paint mixing cups, and I punched a little hole, or a hole in it, so that bushing would punch through there, and then took another piece of 4-inch tape, did the same thing with it. I sliced it and then cut a little bit in the middle, but then I just went ahead and made darts out around that. Then I saturated that piece with resin and pushed this bushing down through it, and then used a stick to push all the excess glass fibers into that groove there right behind that head. So we'll leave that set on there like that until it sets up, and then I can peel that off of there and then form that onto the belly tank and glue it on there, and then we'll put some reinforcing over the top of that. Okay, that worked pretty good. I peeled that off that lid. There's the fiberglass cloth with the resin in it, and there's my bushing there. I trimmed it up a little bit with scissors, and now I can put it in here like this, and it'll stay. I'll get it some more resin and put on there, and yeah, that'll work a lot better. So I can soak that with some resin and get that glued on there, and then I'll put another bigger patch over that to make sure and hold it in. Took that piece of fabric that I had that glued around that bushing and sitting on that lid top, and let it set up till it was firm it wasn't hard yet, it was still flexible. Then I took it and trimmed it off smaller, and then I took and glued it on with epoxy resin to into this hole, and I was able to get it set up where I wanted it in this hole, in this outlet hole. Glued on there. I put some weight on it and stuff and formed it down. It's kind of hanging out here and not glued down tight around there. I'm going to have to trim that off, grind that out a little bit, and then I'll take some more pieces of fabric and go ahead and double that over on the outside. Well, that glued up pretty nice there, like that. That set in there a lot better. That was a lot easier than trying to hold it in by hand. Yeah, I've got a bunch of fibers in here that I've chopped up off of the roving that was coming loose from this mat here. Got all kinds of different lengths. That stuff will wind up orienting in different directions and stuff like that when it's mixed with the resin. I think it winds up being stronger than the stuff you get in the fillers. In fact, I used to be able to buy glass fibers and stuff just for that, but they don't have any around here. But I'm cheap, so I can just take the old fiberglass that I've got and chop it up with the scissors and wear out a good pair of scissors doing that. I'll mix up some more resin here, and then we'll mix up some putty and fill that the rest of that around that bushing. Well, I've got my glass fibers mixed in with my resin here now, and that's a pretty good mix. So you can see how matted that gets in there. Just kind of a mess trying to get it smoothed out and faired in and stuff. Oh, I'll go ahead and apply that in that fuel tank now around that bushing and get that started and set up. Yeah, I think I got that bushing pretty well glassed in there. I've got a lot of that fiberglass resin mixed with that chopped fibers in there, and I got it built up pretty good and faired in. I got it faired in around here in this corner where those holes went through, and over this other hole place where it was thin here, where I'd had the fiberglass fabric over the top of them. But I got it in really good around that bushing. I had grooves in that bushing specifically cut in there for the fiberglass to bond into, and I took a special tool to push all of that stuff down into those grooves and get it packed in there real good. Remember, I had a wide groove and then a narrow groove, and I said I had to use a special tool to do that. There it is. It's a splinter off a piece of firewood that I split out, and I would dip it in some acetone to keep the stuff from sticking it to it too bad. This stuff wanted to stick to it and pull away, so I'd pull it out and dip it in some acetone, push it in there, and work that stuff down in those grooves. And I got it worked in there pretty good. Then I packed it in pretty thick around there after I got it in the grooves and faired that out, smoothed that all out in there, and built that all up with that mat, with that resin, with the chopped fibers in it. And I packed it in there with my fingers. I wear the nitrile gloves, and they get kind of sticky, so I was dipping them in the acetone to keep them from sticking to the resin and the fibers. And you'd get to push that stuff in there, smooth it out a little bit, dip it back in the acetone. Now, the nitrile gloves are not acetone proof, so I went up and got my skin barrier stuff first and coated my hands real good with that, and then put baby powder on my fingers so they'd slip into those gloves. And then I'd run those gloves until they started stretching and take them off and throw them away and grab another pair. So my hands never got wet with the acetone. But that worked pretty good. You'd get the nitrile gloves wet with acetone, and then you could smooth that stuff out pretty good. So I've got that built up pretty good in these corners. There was a hole there underneath where this baffle is right here. We've got that faired in pretty good. And then here again, there was a thin spot right in here, and I've got that pretty well built up with that mat that I made. This West System epoxy resin is a little bit frustrating, because it doesn't cure as fast as regular epoxy resin does. But it doesn't make me sick like regular epoxy resin does either, so I guess there's a pretty good trade-off there. Well, I let this set overnight until it hardened up real good, and then I just took it out and took the die grinder with the sandpaper on it and trimmed up all of this extra material here that didn't get glued down on that. Got that cleaned up on the outside here so it doesn't get torn off. And that's in there pretty good. Here on the inside where that bushing comes out, that turned out pretty good. A little bit rough, and I took the die grinder with sandpaper on it and knocked some of the edges and stuff down on it and smoothed it out a little bit, mainly just to keep anything from hanging up on it and anything start growing in there. You don't want anything place for the water and stuff to hang up, and don't want any algae and stuff growing in there. But this lower section down here got, well, that bushing got pretty close to the bottom there, and then this lower section of that sump kind of got filled up with that resin and the chopped fibers and stuff that I made up. I pushed that in around underneath that real good. Oh, and then faired that out in there in that bottom in that sump, and so that water should drain out of that really nice into that sump, all the water and crap and everything when you check that. So all that bushing is sticking out of there. I mean, it's sealed in there pretty good. There's almost an inch of material sticking out there with the grooves and stuff in it that got chopped fibers and stuff in it with the resin.